This is the skin pigmentation lecture, and today we are going to discuss skin pigmentation and the adaptive significance of variation in skin color. As an outline for this lecture, we are going to first begin by discussing the anatomy of the skin. Where does skin pigmentation come from, and what is the biological anatomy of skin? What does it look like? How is it made up? We will then move on to discuss the evolutionary explanation for the variation in skin color. This will include discussing the adaptive significance of light-colored skin, meaning what are the selective factors that have brought about light skin color, and we'll also do the same for dark skin. What are the selective factors that have led to dark skin color? Skin is the body's largest organ and is important for many reasons. It's one of the best ways that we have of protecting our bodies from invasion of microorganisms or infections. It protects from chemical injuries. It protects from physical injuries. It also plays a big role in the creation of essential nutrients. And as we have already discussed in this class, skin color is one of the most described differences between humans, and it's become one of the main features that we use for most systems of racial classification. Throughout the 19th century into the early 20th century, many scientists were studying skin color by measuring it. For instance, here you can see von Luschan's chromatic scale of 36 different skin tones. And this is really the type of measuring system that was used in science up until the 20th century when the reflectance spectrophotometer was introduced. This machine, and you can see here, is kind of a more updated version than what they were using in the 20th century, early 20th century, but this machine works by shining a light that has a specific wavelength onto the skin, usually done on the upper surface of the hand, like you can see here, or on the upper arms surface. So this light that has a specific wavelength is reflected onto the skin, and then the intensity of the light that is reflected off of the skin is what is actually used as a measurement of skin color. We now know that skin color, like many other biological traits, and we've already talked about this previously, but skin color is a polygenic trait. It works on a continuous scale. So while there are extremes of color, right, there's really, really light-skinned people, and there's really, really dark-skinned color individuals, and there's this whole spectrum of color that lies in between those two extremes. But when it's mapped, it produces what we would call in statistics a bell curve. And this is because it's coded for by multiple genes. But in any population at any given time, we would see this bell curve, this continuous coloration across various skins. So let's first start by talking about carotene. Carotene is a protein, and it's actually the least involved pigment when it comes to deciphering skin color or producing skin pigmentation. It occurs as a yellow, kind of orange color. It's an antioxidant that aids in protecting skin cells from damage. Carotenoids are found in vegetables like carrots. They're found in chard. You can even find them in egg yolks. So this pigment results in a yellowing of the skin. So it can result from having a diet that is oversaturated with foods that are high in beta-carotenes. An example would be, you've probably heard of people doing a juice fast, right? And so this will often juice fasts are often used as a way to kind of detox the body. And they're typically pretty high in beta-carotenes, and getting these carotenes from vegetables like carrots and chard. But this will often cause the skin and eyes to to look a very yellowish kind of orange color. So here's a picture showing some results of taking a beta-carotene supplement, which was done, you can see, by the person whose hand here is pictured on the left side of the screen. You can see it kind of has more of a yellow orange color as opposed to the hand on the right side of the screen. Taking these supplements, beta-carotene supplements, I've just kind of recently learned by reading this that they've become popular, taking them for giving yourself a kind of temporary tanned appearance. Obviously, you can overdo this, and then you can have a really orange skin color. Hemoglobin is a molecule in the blood that aids in carrying oxygen throughout the body. This pigment will create a reddish, pinkish color to the skin. So, oxygenated hemoglobin will produce a reddish, pinkish color, but there's also an opposite effect that can occur if hemoglobin isn't carrying oxygen from the lungs throughout the body. So hemoglobin isn't working efficiently. So if you have deoxygenated hemoglobin, then you're going to have a purplish color. This will produce a purplish color. This is why a person that's not receiving enough oxygen will have a bluish kind of gray color to their skin because of how the hemoglobin is being produced. Melanin plays the biggest role in skin pigmentation. The reason for this is because it can vary in the amount that a person has. It can vary also in the density of it and how it's distributed throughout the body. It's a common pigment, we know, found in nature. Not only do we have it in our skin, but melanin is also found in animal fur. It's also found in the wings of birds as well. And so we see it throughout the animal kingdom, but keep in mind that the function of melanin is different for humans. Why? Well, its purpose for us is a lot different in that it acts as a way to protect against harmful ultraviolet rays. In animals, they're not using melanin, or it's not used for the purpose of protection, but usually it's serving a lot of different functions, but things like camouflage, or for some animals, melanin can produce these different colors that are used for mating preferences or mating purposes. Melanocytes are the cells that produce melanin. So people with different skin colors have similar number of melanocytes, but it's the variation in the color that's produced is actually due to the amount of pigment that's produced by the cells. So some melanocytes in some individuals will produce more and some will produce less. Melanin as a pigment has a dark brown black color. So the denser or more compacted the melanin becomes, the darker the skin becomes. In other words, low levels of melanin production will lead to a yellow kind of pale skin color. And on the other hand, high levels of melanin production will lead to a darker skin color, because remember, melanin as a pigment naturally occurs as a dark brown or black color. So typically, people of European descent, their melanocytes only produce small amounts of melanin, while people with dark skin typically have cells or melanocytes that produce larger amounts of melanin. There are also areas of our body that have higher abundance of melanocytes, like the nipple area, oftentimes the face is darker, and the pubic area. There are two forms or two types of melanin, and we're not going to go into too much detail about these, but I wanted to mention them. The first one is eumelanin, and it's the most common. It produces a brown kind of tan color. And the second one is pheomelanin, and it produces more of a red kind of orange color. We have previously discussed very briefly the adaptive significance for skin pigmentation. Here you can see a skin pigmentation map, and I want you to notice that this fits exactly what we have already discussed, in that skin color is continuous. You can also see from this map that it is something that is clinal or geographically patterned. As I've said before in a previous lecture, skin color is a really good example of natural selection in the human population. There are variations to it that are geographically based, and therefore there are some adaptive purposes to this variation. In other words, there are selective factors that have favored these particular skin colors that you see here on this map in various geographic regions. Just take a look at this map and keep this picture in your mind. Notice that the darker skin colors occur really close to the equator or near the equator, and as we move away from the equator, either north or south, the skin color becomes lighter in complexion. So what does this say about selection? If skin color is darker near the equator and lighter further away from the equator, then what are the selective factors that contribute to this? We're going to read an article that directly relates to this topic, but I also wanted to talk about this in lecture. From what we can determine in the fossil record, around 2 million years ago, the earliest members of the genus Homo started moving away from forests to more open plains, essentially to find food. In this case, it was an adaptive advantage at this period of time to have less hair. Why? Well, it allowed for heat loss to occur, and this is likely around the time as well that we began adapting the mechanism that we now call or know as sweating. If you move to a hotter, more plain-like open area with more sunlight, there had to be a way to adapt, there had to be an adaptation for a way for us to cool our bodies off. And we did in two ways. We lost body hair and we began sweating. However, with this loss of hair, we also lost a major way to protect our skin. We no longer have hair covering our skin. It's completely open to the elements. And we're moving to, if you move to a sunnier environment, this means that you're going to now be experiencing a greater exposure to UV light. So what are the selective factors that contributed to dark color skin or the production of more melanin? Selection has favored higher levels of melanin production near the equator, and this is related to the higher levels of UV radiation that is received at the equator. On this slide here, you can see a picture of levels of UV radiation that have been mapped. You can see that there are high levels of UV radiation closer to the equator and those dark red kind of pink colors, and as you move away from the equator, UV radiation begins to decrease. Sunburn or getting too much UV radiation on your skin can cause lesions or lead to infections, but this is also a way to kind of predisposes individuals to the possibility of skin cancer. So the first selective factor that we can consider that may have selected for darkly pigmented skin near the equator is skin cancer. Let's just look at some of the evidence for this. Skin cancer is found to be prevalent among light-skinned individuals in tropical latitudes. There's research, for instance, that shows that in Nigeria and Tanzania, no albino individual over the age of 20 was found to be free of malignant or pre-malignant skin lesions. Another example is that in Tanzania, chronic skin damage was found in every albino infant by the end of their first year of life. So these examples of this high rate of skin damage in lighter skinned individuals that are located in areas of high UV radiation really shows that skin cancer is likely a selective factor or a selective pressure in tropical areas for dark skin. Another selective factor for darkly pigmented skin near areas of high UV radiation is the adequate production of folate. Folate is a B vitamin that is replenished through our diets, and its main purpose is to help our body in the production of new cells. Most people can get enough folic acid in the foods that they eat. It's an important thing to have, because if we don't have adequate amounts of folate in our body, then proper cell division won't occur. This can cause a folic acid deficiency. Some symptoms of this can include anemia, infertility, lots of various birth defects. Think about the growth and development of a baby in utero. The most important time for cell division is when that embryo is being developed. So if a pregnant mom doesn't have enough folate in their body, this can likely lead to birth defects because the fetus is not experiencing proper cell division throughout its growth and development process. UV radiation can destroy the folic acid that's circulating in our blood. And so because of this, high melanin in the skin, something that's actually blocking out UV rays, can act as a way to protect that circulating folic acid in our body. So this is another selective factor for darkly pigmented skin for individuals that are located near the equator. But what about light skin color? What are the selective factors that have favored low levels of melanin pigmentation, where there are low levels of UV radiation? One selective factor is the regulation of vitamin D synthesis. Vitamin D in the body is derived primarily from the skin and also some from our diet. It's important for many reasons, including building strong bones. It keeps our immune system strong. It's also useful for the adequate functioning of many organs like the brain and others throughout our body. Vitamin D is synthesized in the skin by exposure to UVB rays. Let's see. UVB, sorry, I'm trying to find my slides here. Let's move to the next slide. So as I was saying, vitamin D is synthesized in the skin by exposure to UVB rays. UVB will cause a photochemical conversion of molecules in our body. So this is properly referred to as 7-DHC or 7-dehydrocholesterol, which is turning it into what we call pre-vitamin D. If an individual has high levels of melanin content in their skin, then the exposure to UVB rays will be decreased. So this isn't going to allow for this photochemical conversion. So the proper vitamin D that we're going to actually use for calcium absorption will never be produced. Pre-vitamin D is then transformed into vitamin D by a temperature-dependent process. This typically takes around 2 to 3 days. The vitamin D that is produced will then diffuse into the blood vessels of the dermis. Other organs like the liver and the kidney will then transform the vitamin D into the most active form that is used for calcium absorption, which is imperative for bone development, tooth development, and even for the regulation of muscle actions. So if there's a deficiency in vitamin D, oftentimes in children and infants, this can lead to rickets. In adults, osteomalacia has resulted. Basically, both of these are kind of the same deficiencies. They're just different terminology for whether we're talking about a child versus an adult. But both of these deficiencies is a defect in the calcification of growing bones. So this often is going to lead to bones that are structurally weak and deformed. This typically affects the long bones, and it will create a kind of bowed leg appearance and often lead to deformities of the pelvic bones as well. So oftentimes for adults, and for children, locomotion can be impaired, and for adult women, childbearing can be really dangerous because the pelvic region is distorted. So let's get back to the slide that I showed a few minutes ago that stated that around 2 million years ago, early members of the genus Homo began moving. So Homo erectus was likely a very darkly pigmented hominid due to its location in Africa near the equator. But at one point in time, Homo erectus left Africa and began traveling north into Europe and to other more higher latitude areas. So this means that they were being exposed to less UV rays, and their skin was naturally blocking out these UV rays because, again, they were likely dark-skinned individuals producing lots of melanin, so they're blocking out these UV rays. Not only that, but probably I can guess that if they are moving into colder climates, this probably means they are making clothing in various ways to cover themselves for warmth, and that's only adding to the lack of exposure to UV rays. And for this reason, there's likely a very strong selection for low melanin content in the skin because there had to be some way to improve vitamin D synthesis. Skin color is a simple adaptation to two conflicting selective forces. As humans, we have a need to protect ourselves from exposure to UV rays to avoid skin cancer and lack of folate production. However, on the other hand, we need adequate UV exposure as well, or vitamin D deficiency can become an issue. So skin color offers a really good example of evolution and natural selection. There are selective factors, depending on the environment, that are acting to promote these various skin colors. So I want to kind of end this lecture and remind you that if you haven't done so already, please read the article for this week. I kind of cited it in this lecture. It will go into further detail about these selective factors that we've just discussed. And you're also going to watch a film that's kind of created by Nina Jablonski, who is one of the authors of the article you'll be reading for the week, that I hope you'll find interesting, that will kind of bring all this into a more visual perspective for those of you that are more visual.